All right, our third talk in the session will be given by Lindsey Byrne from astronomy at Northwestern University. Her advisor is Claude-André Fauché-Giguère, and she did her practicum at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in 2021. Lindsey, all yours.
Great, thank you. So let's talk about black holes. So black holes are astronomical objects which are so incredibly dense that even light itself can't escape them. And usually when we think about black holes, we think about black holes that form from stars. That is to say, at the end of the lifetime of a massive star, it will collapse inward and form a black hole. The black holes that I'm going to be talking about, though, are much bigger than those ones. So observations suggest that most galaxies, and especially massive galaxies, contain supermassive black holes at their centers. And these are black holes that are millions or even billions of times the mass of the sun. And accretion onto these supermassive black holes, so when gas accretes onto it via an accretion disk, can drive incredibly high luminosities, and that's what creates active galactic nuclei, or AGN, like quasars. And so those are just extremely high luminosity objects that astronomers have observed at the centers of galaxies for decades. Now, there's a lot that we don't understand about supermassive black holes. There's a lot that's still kind of mysterious to us. So how do they form? There are theories we don't know for sure. How do they grow and accrete to get to the sizes that they are today through accretion and mergers? There are many open questions there. And then there's also a lot of questions about feedback. Feedback is the energy produced by supermassive black holes when matter accretes onto them, and it can take many forms: winds, radiation, cosmic rays, jets. And that feedback can produce enough energy to significantly affect the evolution of the galaxy if the energy couples to the galaxy's gas. But how that works and exactly what impact it has is something that we're still trying to understand. So this image here is a picture of the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way, so at our galaxy. This was taken by the Event Horizon Telescope. And what you can see there, the orange, that is the accretion disk, so where matter is accreting onto the black hole and it's giving off this energy. So to explore some of these questions, I turn to the FIRE simulations. These are cosmological hydrodynamic zoom-in simulations, and what that means is that we simulate a large box of the universe. We simulate the dark matter in order to capture the large-scale structure and interactions between halos, and then we pick a single galaxy and re-simulate that at high resolution, including all of the gas and the stars. And so numerically, we do that using a meshless finite mass magnetohydrodynamic solver called Gizmo. So it's a mesh. So it's like a sort of like a moving mesh method, but without the mesh. And this is numerically a very complicated problem because galaxies, of course, are very, very big, and in order to model them accurately, we have to capture processes that are occurring over a very wide range of physical and temporal scales. So we are trying to, we use subgrid models, but in order to get, for some things, but in order to get accurate, we're still having to model processes that range orders of magnitude in space and time. And so this, of course, is computationally very expensive. These simulations can require on the order of 10 to the 6 CPU hours. So that could be hundreds or even thousands of processors running in parallel over the course of weeks or months. So the images I have here are one of the simulated galaxies that I'm going to be talking about. So the top images are a temperature map of the gas in the galaxy viewed when we're viewing the galactic disk edge on and then face on. So blue is the cold gas in the galactic disk, red is the hot gas surrounding it. And then down here, it's the same galaxy, but now this is actually a mock Hubble image. This is what the galaxy would look like if it was viewed through the Hubble telescope. So these simulations are very high resolution enough. They're high resolution enough that we can capture star-forming molecular clouds in the multi-phase ISM, which is interstellar media. So we're capturing different temperature and ionization phases of the gas. They include detailed prescriptions for star formation and stellar feedback, feedback again meaning energy. In this case, that includes supernova, stellar winds, photoionization, and other similar processes. And the first key result that I'm going to present to you today is that stellar feedback regulates black hole growth. So what do I mean by that? Well, so if we look at the fire simulations, I looked at fire simulations of galaxies of a range of masses ranging from dwarf galaxies to Milky Way mass galaxies, so the size of our galaxies, and then more massive galaxies. And what we find is that if we look at if we track the evolution of the black holes in those galaxies over time, which is what this plot is doing, we see that they grow very slowly and intermittently at early times, and then once the galaxy reaches a stellar mass of around 10 to the 10.5, they start growing much more rapidly, and then they converge onto the observed scaling relation, so they start matching observations. So there's this basically two phases, this very sort of slow gradual growth, and then the much more rapid growth. And it all seems to hinge on this stellar mass of around 10 to the 10.5. And we can also see that along with the black hole going through this transition, we can see the evolution of the galaxy, so from early times to later times. And you can see that early in the galaxy's lifetime, they're very clumpy, they're dynamic. It's kind of like there's gas getting blown out of the galaxy everywhere. But then as time goes on, it forms this sort of nice, stable disk. So the question, of course, is why does the black hole do that? And to understand that, I looked at properties of the galaxy to understand what changes are happening in the galaxy at around the time of that black hole growth transition. And I identified 6 properties of the galaxy that undergo changes at around that time across a range of scales. So looking at the central kiloparsec of the galaxy, so the very center of the galaxy, we find that the stellar surface density and the escape velocity, there's an identifiable threshold in those properties above which we see the black hole begin to accelerate its growth. On the scale of the galaxy itself, it's a similar for stellar mass, as I showed on the previous slide, but then also the star formation. So early in a galaxy's lifetime, the star formation tends to happen in bursts. So we get these big bursts of star formation that are intermittent with sort of quieter periods. And then later in the galaxy's lifetime, the star formation becomes much more steady. It's more time steady, it's constant. And that transition also correlates to the black hole growth transition. And then finally, we can look at the scale of the dark matter halo surrounding the galaxy. And we find a threshold in the halo mass. And then we also find that the black hole growth transition correlates to changes in the thermal properties of the gas in the dark matter halo surrounding the galaxy. So this is kind of remarkable because we wouldn't necessarily expect all of these properties to be correlated to one another. As I said, they represent a very wide range of scales so the black hole accretion, the accretion kernel is on the order of something like 10 to 100 parsecs. But then we see that it's correlating not just with properties of that inner central kiloparsec, but also to stellar properties on the scale of the galaxy itself, and even properties of the dark matter halo, which is hundreds of kiloparsecs in size. So these results indicate basically 2 mechanisms that we believe are contributing to this black hole growth transition. So first, the threshold in the stellar surface density suggests the gravitational confinement of stellar outflows. Essentially, once you get up above a particular surface density, the gravity is going to be trapping supernova and trapping stellar winds inside the galaxy. And so when those outflows are trapped, the gas will build up in the galaxy and it's available to fuel the black hole. Whereas when the stellar surface densities are lower, that gas will get blown out of the galaxy and then the black hole doesn't have anything to eat, basically. And then similarly, the other mechanism is the pressure confinement of stellar feedback. So again, so this has to do with, again, the thermal properties of the circumgalactic medium. Essentially, gas around the galaxy will be heated by accretion shocks, and then there are basically two cases for how it can accrete onto the galaxy. If the cooling time is less than the freefall time, it'll just collapse onto the galaxy on a freefall time scale. But if the cooling time is greater than the freefall time scale, which happens once the galaxy becomes sufficiently massive, then you'll get a pressure-supported hot halo, and the gas will be accreting much more gradually. We call that virialization. And that's key because when the halo is virialized, it will also have a more uniform pressure. And so again, so you can look, if you look at these images, early in the galaxy's lifetime, there are pressure fluctuations that allow the outflows to escape. So again, they're just getting blasted out of the galaxy. As time goes on, the pressure of this hot gas around the galaxy becomes more uniform, and then those stellar outflows are confined to the galaxy, and it allows gas to build up and fuel the black hole. So I've talked about growth. I also want to talk about feedback. So AGN feedback, again, this is the energy given off by black holes, is key to understanding galaxy evolution. And in particular, it can help us understand one of the most important open questions in galaxy evolutionary theory, which is the question of quenching. Essentially, when we look at massive galaxies, we see that many of them are quenched. That is to say, they are no longer actively forming stars. So smaller galaxies are almost always actively forming stars. For larger mass galaxies, we see this bimodal population where some of them are forming stars, but many of them just are not. And so something is happening in these galaxies, these massive galaxies, to prevent gas from cooling and collapsing into stars. And AGN feedback is the most promising mechanism by which that could occur. And this is really key for galaxy simulations because it's very difficult to accurately model massive galaxies without AGN feedback. Either without that feedback, the simulations, either they're just forming too many stars, or they're too dense at their centers, and it can actually become computationally very difficult or impossible to model massive galaxies. For example, in the fire simulations, without AGN feedback, once you get to galaxies above a certain mass, they become so dense in the center that the adaptive time stepping, where the time steps are getting smaller as the medium gets more dense in order to capture all the relevant physical processes. And so the simulation will just grind to a halt because the time steps are getting so small and it's so dense. So in previous generations of fire simulations, we were only able to model, create galaxies with stellar masses of around 10 to the 10.5, which is just what this plot is showing. It's just showing that they sort of topped out at about that stellar mass. And that's unfortunate because that only, if we look at this observed plot of the fraction of galaxies which are quenched versus the stellar mass, that only represents up to about here. So we're missing this entire population of quenched galaxies if we're unable to go up to masses higher than that. Now, the latest generation of fire simulations, which are the ones that I'm going to be presenting to you today, do include AGN feedback, and they are able to push up to a much higher mass scale that includes this population of massive galaxies and quenched galaxies. So simulations including AGN feedback over the past decade have had success in producing more realistic massive galaxies. What other simulation groups have done, though, is typically they implement black hole feedback prescriptions that are calibrated to match observations. Basically, they're simple energy injection models that are fine-tuned to produce properties of the galaxies, like being quenched. What we're doing with the fire simulations is a bit different. We're implementing multi-channel AGN feedback, including radiation, winds, and cosmic rays. And we're calibrating the energetics of those feedback mechanisms to match observations and to match what we know, and basically from first principles to match what we know about what the energetics of the physics should be. So we're not calibrating them to produce a particular result. And the question is, with that more realistic model, can we produce realistic galaxies? So I'm comparing three models. So on the left, this is a galaxy this is a massive galaxy without a supermassive black hole at the center. And then as we move to the middle panel, we add supermassive black hole that gives off radiation and winds. And as you can see, the galaxy is more extended. It's less compact, which is what we want. And we see a bit of this disk structure here. And then for a third model, I included a stronger feedback model, which also includes cosmic rays. So this galaxy looks smaller. It's not because it's more compact, but because it's actually just smaller. The feedback is preventing star formation, and so the galaxy is less massive. And what we find is that adding the feedback model produces galaxies which match massive galaxies which match observations, while the galaxies with no feedback do not. And so I'll just quickly put up my conclusion slide. And I'd like to thank Krell, DOE, my advisor Claude Andre, and the entire FIRE collaboration. Thank you.